Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics. Nick Pelvey. I'll be your moderator for today's presentation, which will be an interesting presentation that should be on everybody's mind, but isn't because we always have other distraction. And that's the budget of the United States government, fiscal year 2024. We all hear about people that are going to shut down the government. People are going to do bad things to the government. But here's the problem that I see. The budget of the United States government, which we're going to look at today, and this is the authentic document from the U.S. White House, is not discussed in any courses. In other words, when I took my degree in political science, we never went over the U.S. budget. High school, forget it. Middle school, forget it. Elementary school, forget it. Then I go to an MBA class, we never went over the budget of the United States. I go for a law degree. We never go over the budget of the United States. Masters in law, never go over the budget of the United States. Yet this represents 25% of all of our expenditures, yet it is not even looked at. So with that, we're going to look at that today, and we brought in somebody who is a member of the Mega Society. Hopefully he has the ability to read 170 pages in a couple hours, digest it. Oh, in case you don't know where Mega is, there's Mensa, which is down here. If you're smarter than that, you become a Mega Society member. A lot smarter. So with that, we're going to bring in Rick Rosner. Rick, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I don't know if you had time to read this 170 plus page.
Yeah, I didn't do my homework. I've got it teed up on the computer next to me.
Oh, you do have it teed up. Well, I mean, at least.
But I did look at a year-by-year chart to see what kind of deficits we've been running.
Well, what type of deficits are we running? I went through this and I got to, let's see, I went all the way to Department of Education so far.
In 2008, we broke a $1 trillion annual deficit for the first time as we were trying to spend our way out of the crash of 07, 08.
Right.
And then in 2020 and 2021, we racked up deficits of $3 trillion a year.
Okay.
And
this budget from my
is
like 1.5 trillion deficit.
Yeah. My feeling is, we've been doing deficit spending for decades. And what you want to do is appear to the rest of the world like a good credit risk. So they'll keep buying our bonds. And, right now we don't have a Speaker of the House. And that looks terrible to the rest of the world.
Right.
I mean, we should get our financial house in order, but at the same time, we should also not look like jackasses.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. David, did you have time to read this wonderful document, or have you read this before? I can tell you in our education system, all the education I went through, we never had a class on the U.S. budget. Not only did we not have a class on it, to my knowledge, even today, there are no classes offered on this U.S. budget. Yet, this is the primary source document for 25% of our economy. So a couple issues. Number one, why does our education system completely ignore this extremely important document? And number two, why is this always not balanced?
Well, first, our education system largely ignores a broader topic, and that is financial literacy. And as you know, I have been a longstanding advocate for making financial literacy a mandatory part in order to be able to graduate from high school. And presumably, this could be a subset of that financial literacy, because the last thing you want to do if you're trying to manage your own finances is follow the bad example of the federal government. But there are also challenges with regard to state and local issues. But people don't even know how to manage their own finances. And by the way, this is the closest thing that the consolidated federal government has to a strategic plan. But it's fundamentally flawed because it's for 1 year. Strategic plans are are for decades. They're not for 1 year. And many times when these budgets are prepared, they're the president's proposal. And as you know, Nick, the president proposes, but the Congress disposes. The Congress has the power of the purse under the Constitution. And many times the proposal by the president is what they say, dead on arrival. In other words, it's the wish list of the president, but not consistent with what's realistic to be able to get through the House and the Senate for the president to be able to sign. And last thing I would say is that the administrations have been consistently late sending up their budget proposal, but the Congress has been worse. The Congress has only passed the budget and all the appropriations bills on time 4 times in my lifetime. And they missed it again this year. And now we're in a CR that's supposed to expire in November, and yet we don't have a Speaker of the House. And so you can't do any business until you have a Speaker of the House. But that's just some opening thoughts. And it's good to be back with you. I was out of the country last week.
Yeah, I figured that. But the thing is, what to me is this is something that's so important. We hear a lot of rhetoric on the media, like last one was, well, government shutdown, the budget's not balanced. But no one ever goes through the budget at all. So the thing is, it's almost like there's all this yammering and not really looking at the hardcore facts of it. Now, part of the reason they don't go over it, it's 175 pages. But the good news is the first 75 pages is what I call a sales job. In other words, it's the administration telling you, oh, how wonderful spending all this money will be for thou. Okay, so you got to get rid of that. And then you got to go to what I call the meat and potatoes, starting with the Department of Agriculture, which is the first part. Now, what got me about this is that the budget provides, this is Department of Agriculture, provides $6 billion in SNAP, WICS, et cetera. So in the Department of Agriculture, when you get meals at schools, it actually is funded by the Department of Agriculture. Right. Now, I never knew this. I had no clue where the money's coming from. But apparently, according to this, that's where it's coming from. And you have to look, where can you cut and where can you improve? When you go through this line item by line item, you go, well, it's going to be very difficult to cut that, but is there a possible way you can improve it? Then you go to the next item, high-speed affordable internet. Now, this is where it really gets me. Of course, I argued with Mark. He's behind the scenes right now about this. Not everybody's going to get high-speed internet, not at the cost of $50,000 a house, which is what the Wall Street Journal estimated it to be if you're running high-speed internet in certain places in Kansas and Oklahoma, Nebraska. It's a $60 billion expense, $60 billion. The problem with $60 billion, well, that's not a lot of money. But come on, David, billion here, billion there starts adding up to trillions. My question is, yeah, Rick, go on.
There's another way to look at $1 billion in federal spending. We have 1/3 of a billion people in the country, so $1 billion is $3 for every American.
Yeah, you can look at it that way, but then the $3 starts adding up.
It does, but we talked about financial literacy. We're also bad at overall mathematical literacy.
Right, and the other problem is that it's not like we have the money, we're spending it. We're borrowing the money to spend the $60 billion. Am I correct, David?
Right, and paying interest on it. And Rick, by the way, one of the things I've said for many years now is the new 4-letter word in federal fiscal policy is math.
Basic math, by the way. You don't need algebra. You don't need trig. You just
you don't need calculus. At some point, before you get to calculus in high school or college, everybody should have to take statistics.
Yeah.
My buddy, who's he's an anti-vaxxer, and he sends me, dozens of papers by anti-vax people, and all of them have huge math errors. It's that a bunch of people in the country just can't do math. And
they're math challenged.
If you can't do math, you can't do economics. You can't,
do anything. Well, yeah, you should be able to do basic math, but also this the problem I'm having as I go through the budget is it's not balanced. Number one, if it was balanced, I would go, okay, you got the money, you're spending it. Instead, we're going in debt for it. And the other problem we have, David, we're already 33 trillion in debt. So this document should be taken seriously, item by item.
But
when I see expenses,
let's get realistic, okay?
Yeah.
Very few people will read more than 10 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And I would bet that there's less than 10 people that are active members of the Congress that have read this entire document.
Ow!
All right, less than 10. All right,
it's the most important document out there.
But you know, one of the things that happened when I was Comptroller General.
Hey, I got a question for you.
Hold on. Well, let me finish. Two things that happened that are relevant to this when I was Comptroller General. First, the annual financial statements of the U.S. government, the Treasury Department started putting out a plain English summary because, you know, the budget's much longer than the financial statements, but the financial statements are too long. And so one of the things that ought to happen here is there ought to be a plain English summary that's no more than 10 pages.
I agree.
Secondly, the second thing I did when I was, that relates to this matter when I was at GAO is people somehow had a feeling that the thicker something was, the better it was. And I said, well, I can't say that that's true or not true, but what I can tell you is the thicker it is, the less likely it's going to get read. Mm-hmm. So therefore, I mandated that every GAO report that went out and every GAO testimony had to have a one-page summary. In some cases, I let them do front and back, but in most cases, just the front only. And if possible, have a graphic that would go with it, because graphics convey a lot more than words do, if you will. And that was, that was culturally not acceptable to the organization, but they did it because I mandated it, and it stuck, and it's one of the most popular things that was done for members, for the staff, for the media, because if it's something you're interested in, you might read more, but if somebody gives you something that's too thick to begin with, you're not going to read it at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, question. I had a question for David, because there was since y'all went to the agriculture, there is a very significant financial relief that is about to come up. Some people may be glad about the relief. Some people may not be glad about the relief, but you actually have to read, like you said, the budget to learn about this relief and everything. And the deadline is going to come up on Halloween and all along those lines, because there is money in the budget for those that are African American and Native American farmers, because they're accepting applications for financial relief. You ready for this, Kim? Of up to $500,000 for farmers who have faced discrimination in its lending program. So they are opening this up for folks that are felt that they were discriminated against, and definitely any farmer, forest landowner, or rancher who experienced discrimination by the department in its farm loan program prior to January 1st, 2021, or has been assigned or assumed a USDA farm loan debt that was the subject of the USDA discrimination, because apparently there was a big discrimination suit, they can go ahead and get this money. But you've got to be look at the budget that you were looking at and go in and actually apply for it. So I think they're going to review them in November or December. So I just want to know what folks thought about this.
I'm just wondering whether Elizabeth Warren is going to apply for her garden in her backyard. But we'll
well, the thing is, this goes back also, Mark, to
She might.
importance of this document. 25% of our GDP runs through this document. A lot of people aren't even aware. There'll be a lot of black farmers, Mark, I can promise you, won't even be aware of what you just said.
That's
because
right.
They don't follow this particular budget, and the media isn't going to help them. They're not going to tell them what you just told them. So
that's why I just told them so they could go apply for it.
I know that. Unfortunately, that's what I'm saying. The importance of this document that should be taught in every school in the country is before us right now. And to my knowledge, also, David, the media never showed this document. In other words, it's almost like, what, we can't see this? Is there something sacred about it?
It's too much. I mean, frankly,
It
It's
is too
only
much to read.
175 pages. If you read a brief from the Supreme Court,
It is too much. But by the way, for anybody that is watching,
I mean, how many people actually,
Nick,
when you're
just
talking
for
about
anybody
everybody should know
that is
math,
watching and is curious,
but how many people actually know and understand everything that the IRS gives you to fill out? I mean, they make so many loopholes and dance arounds, and even they don't know. Sometimes, when I've been through an audit, they don't even know. And so I think that they just overcomplicate things, hoping nobody will ask questions or even try or even argue what's going on. I think that we need to simplify things. We need to make it as simple as 1 + 1, and it can be made very simple. I think the budget needs to be adhered. I mean, come on. If we behave this way financially, we would be homeless, probably without a job. If we didn't show up to work, like the government keeps threatening to do, we wouldn't have a job tomorrow. We need to hold them accountable. And David has been saying this for quite some time. We need to set some standards and start holding some accountability. Otherwise, we're never going to get ahead. And this budget won't. I'll put it to you this way. You can write as many budgets as you want, and it will never get exercised ever.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example of what might be a more effective way to communicate as part of a financial literacy program. Okay. Take the major line items. First, talk about gross revenues. Then talk about tax expenditures, which are deductions, exemptions, credits, exclusions. Reduce that from the gross expenditures to get net revenues. That's how much the revenues that we have. Then take each major category of spending, which if you look at that, the major categories, the top categories are Social Security, defense, Medicare, Medicaid, and I can go on. All right. Take the top categories, get down to the bottom line, which is a big negative, show that that's how much more you have to borrow. And then if you want to make it even more user friendly, divide it by the number of households. And that way you can see what the numbers look like on a household basis. Because one of the other things that we have to do is we have to teach individuals how to do budgeting on their own. And when they do budgeting on their own, they need to consider things that typically aren't considered. Taxes. They need to consider savings. And they need to consider charitable contributions. So what we have to do is we have to make it simple. We have to put it in, we got to get away from these trillions, which nobody can understand. Divide it by person, divide it by household, something that people can relate to, and then compare it to an individual's budget. And you can say, no way in hell I could do that. Go to your bank and try to borrow some money based upon these numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I got to leave early, but that's crazy. But the question becomes, we keep putting ourselves in this position. And at what point, David, I got asked this on PBS the other day, and I didn't really know how to answer, but I think I answered well. I wish you were on there with me, but they just asked me what would happen if we keep incurring the debt. But I think eventually what it would mean is higher interest rates for everyone, less investments in other areas like research and development, infrastructure, stifling investments and innovation and even business growth, right? I mean, eventually you could stagnate your economy and actually the working class would really suffer, correct? Wouldn't that be what happened if you just keep less? I answered the best I could.
Yeah, less economic growth, okay, less opportunity for individuals,
Okay.
higher interest rates, declining dollar. We could go on, but those are just a few of the headline things.
Right.
I mean, by the way, one of the things that we need to do, Steve, one of the things we do is the reason that I advocate not to focus on balanced budgets, but to focus on debt to GDP, which is what really matters, how much debt is percentage of your economy. The reason I say that is we ought to have a capital budget for investments and an operating budget.
Yes, we're mixing it all together.
Like most states, the capital budget should be for items that have multi-generational benefits and that are supposed to generate a positive rate of return over time. Whereas the operating budget is more short-term consumption, if you will, which is something that you ought to try to achieve balance. But by doing it that way, debt to GDP covers both. It doesn't keep you from being able to make appropriate investments that you have to if you're trying to do a balanced budget. You couldn't do that on a balanced budget requirement if you had to make a big investment capital expenditure. On the other hand, it keeps you from gaming the system by just because you're spending on money on something, you call it an investment, when in reality, you're probably never going to get a rate of return on it ever. You're just trying to basically make it sound like it's good, when in fact, it's probably ineffective.
When I answered the question on the air, I said, well, I wish it was like, who wants to be a millionaire? Can I phone a friend? And you were the friend I was thinking about. So
yeah, you would have.
I might have been in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle if you tried to call me, because that's where I was.
I need to make a phone call.
Yeah,
I got to go, guys. But thank you so much. I'm going to listen in. I'm just going to keep my audio on. Thank you so much.
No Hey, David, really quickly, because you kind of alluded to it earlier and everything, isn't part of the problem that we need to have some very basic courses on budget? Because I'm thinking, and I could be way off in my percentages, that probably about 70 to 80% of the United States population is living over their personal budget. We're not even talking about the government budget. So isn't that part of the problem, is that we need to actually have this budget conversation at a very basic level, even among our common citizens and everything? Because I'm of the opinion that the vast majority, and I'll even say myself, are living way over are living beyond their means and everything.
Well, that's a huge part of our economy now. The credit card economy is how we operate now.
70% of the economy is consumption. Mm-hmm. If you look at the macro statistics, household debt is going up. Mm-hmm. Household savings is going down.
Exactly.
That's the opposite of what we need. Mm-hmm. With savings comes investment. With investment comes innovation, productivity improvement, greater economic growth, greater opportunity. And we're on a track that does the opposite of that. So, it's imprudent, unsustainable, and frankly, immoral.
It is. If you look at who does the higher interest rates benefit, it's not benefiting the hard struggling middle class or students graduating from college that need to get out into the world and maybe get a house or a car. It's not benefiting the people who build America. It's benefiting the investors in bonds that will get paid a higher return on investment. The other problem is that time and again we've proven higher gas prices and energy prices only hurt the poverty. It doesn't help us any at all. And it only helps the pockets that get lined by the higher rates that they're charging the executives who are getting their bonuses at a very phenomenal high rate. None of what's going on is helping us. When, people go, oh, we got to raise the interest rates. No, you don't. No, you don't. What you need to do is cut your spending, focus on what's right for the people, not what's right for your own pocket. And that's what's happening. The government that we have in place today, they don't care about us. It's like, what's his name? Getz, who was like, we don't need you up there because you're not there for our party. Well, no, you're supposed to be there for the people, not your party. And anyone who's up there for their party should be removed from office. And I think if they close down, and I don't know if we can do this, but if they close down the government, we need to march in and fire every one of them and put new people in place. That's what we need to do.
Well, two things on that. One, as you know, I'm one of the national co-founders of No Labels, which is not left, not right, forward, progress, not partisanship, results, not rhetoric, among many other things. Okay. And we have long been for no budget, no pay, which means that if Congress doesn't pass a timely budget and all the appropriations bills on time, they don't get paid. They have to work full time until they get it done, and there's no retroactive pay. Shockingly, the people that are exempt from any effect on their pay whatsoever are members of Congress. And even essential employees, which I was when I was in the government, every position I had, you have to work, but you don't get paid. And non-essential employees, you don't have to work, you don't get paid, but everybody gets retroactive pay. So, I mean, what kind of system is that? It's just downright crazy, all right? So, again, let's come back to we need mandatory financial literacy before you can graduate high school. And it needs to be multidimensional. It needs to be personal finances. It needs to be public finances. People need to understand also a little bit about, how the private sector works, if you will. But that's part of economics, right? I mean, that's part of economics. For the record, when I taught the economics of national security at the Naval Academy, which was rated the #1 undergraduate school in the country, tied with BYU, Brigham Young University. This was a essential part of the course that I taught, what we're talking about.
Yeah,
I don't know how you get this education out there without a strong top-down push. Imagine like Rachel Maddow or Hannity saying, tonight we've got a special hour. The entire hour is going to be devoted to the budget.
Yay.
People would be turning channels at the speed of light.
Hey,
We
hey,
need
Rick,
to
hold on.
type it into CSI or, one of those crime murder mysteries, and I guarantee you people would get
Here's
educated.
how you do it. It's very simple.
Right.
You make federal aid conditioned on
Exactly.
including this as part of your curriculum and making it as part of the requirements to graduate from high school. That's how you do it.
Hey,
Well, I
David.
think
Hey,
that you should not be able to get a student loan until they have sat down and explained it to you, and you took a test on what it costs to pay it back at the end of the
I
day.
agree with that too.
And you have to pass the test. You can't.
you have
I
to
don't
pass
care
the
about
test.
SATs. I'm watching young adults, and they're sitting there. Now that you have to start paying back the student loan, and the interest rates are. They can adjust the interest rates. Congress picks the interest rates. The student loans. If anyone's ever looked at them, they're divided into. You get like 8 different loans while you're through a 4-year college. You get about 12 if you go get your master's and doctors. It might even be up to 16 different little loans because they do it every semester. Sometimes they divide it between, subsidized and non-subsidized. So you've got but you don't understand it. And then at the bottom, they go, pay this minimum and you'll be fine. But you never, in fact, it accrues more interest. So
No, it
by the
definitely
time
does that and everything.
you
But
pay
Kim,
that
isn't
minimum,
it,
and I think that
but
should be illegal, David.
Kim,
That should
isn't
be
part of-
illegal. If they need to say, if you pay this amount, then at the every month, then this is what you owe. If you pay this amount, this is what I think there needs to be a chart so that these kids who graduate.
But
right?
Kim,
I
and this
think
is
it's
actually
little
a question I
off
was
the
going to go to
subject,
David as well. Isn't part of the problem that it comes back to what we were talking about with education and understanding the budget and everything? Because I am thinking, I live right around the corner from Duke, as many of y'all know, and everything, and I can tell you that not only are they not prepared to pay their student loan back, and I still know folks even at my age range that are still paying back their student loans and all along those lines, but they are also overspending. I mean, it's not an accident then that there are so many fast food restaurants around here, and they are probably overspending way past their budget just in terms of the fast food that they're eating. So they probably need to have a better understanding of just personal budgeting, even when they go to college. I would hope that they learn it in high school, but I'm thinking most of them haven't and need to learn it in the college level, because I'm guaranteeing you some of the students I'm seeing are probably spending 20 to 30, maybe even 40 to 50% of their money that they're getting coming in on their stomach costs, their food going into their stomach.
Kim, you'll be happy to know the SAT is on the way out. COVID, it was dying and COVID just really not. You couldn't give the SAT because you can't put
It's not just the SAT, Rick.
Class
Yeah, I think standardized
it's
testing.
optional
and-
now at almost all universities.
All the universities. But let's talk about student loans, okay? Because the millionaire next door, by the way, who filled in for you, David, last week,
Right.
Bill Denko, to talk about education. And the millionaire next door looks to get education for their kids at no cost. How do you do it? And by the way, we did it. We moved from Florida to Georgia. My wife said, got to go to Georgia, get out of this mystical Boca Raton place. But also, they have the Hope Scholarship.
Right.
So if you had a B average, which my son was able to get a B average in high school, you get to go to the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech for free. He
Right.
went to Georgia Tech for free, 4 years, scholarship, everything paid, and then went on to Duke University with a full scholarship there. So you're able to navigate the system if somebody would even tell you what the system is. But this is only one opportunity that's out there. We're looking right now to take our grandchildren overseas for education. Why? You wouldn't believe how inexpensive it is. I went to Oxford because it was less expensive than the University of Miami Law School. I could go to law school in Oxford. I told my parents that because Oxford is a public school. Now today they raised the prices because a lot of people figured out the Oxford loophole. But you can go to a lot of schools overseas in Europe for free. You don't need these big student loans. The problem is this information is not getting out to the students, that there are ways that you can navigate the system, go to great international universities. One we're looking at in Switzerland right now, the tuition is like $200 a semester, something like that. And foreign students are allowed to go. There's a couple in Italy the same way. One of their alumni was Galileo. He taught at University of Padua. Great universities to go to. Just don't stay here in the United States of America.
Our kid just got her PhD for free from King's College London.
Are you kidding me? Oh, you took
But you have to be able to send them
Hold on,
overseas.
over there, a PhD takes 3-4 years. Here it's 7 years.
Yeah.
But
right.
you got to
I
be
agree.
able to afford to send them overseas, get them the
It's
right
not that
passport.
She gets a living stipend too.
Yeah, and
Hey,
you have
Taylor, you took advantage of the international education loophole that is not well known by the regular person. I had no idea, Rick, but see, to me, that was brilliant. In other words, send her over to King's College, great university, and free. Are you kidding me?
Let's just keep in mind one thing, Nick.
Yeah.
When we say free, it may be free to the individual. It's not free. Somebody's paying. Okay.
Unfortunately, the EU.
Thank you,
Somebody's
David.
paying. It's not free.
Yeah, but,
The
but
European Union
somebody in
taxpayers.
England and across Europe, they're saying, it costs us money but we're getting it back by having talented, educated people come here to learn and then maybe to stay and contribute to our economy.
But are we doing that here as well? Hold on a second. Are we doing that here as well? Because I want to say, I said it before, I want to say that my upstairs neighbors are from China. I want to say that there's some other neighbors that are from some other countries that are nearby. So they are probably coming here and getting some education at a fairly discounted rate because they are coming from other parts of the world and everything.
If,
So
if
David,
we can keep them, yeah. But if they turn on like the TV and see like "F you immigrants, you dirty immigrants," then they maybe take their education and skedaddle back to Sichuan.
that's definitely the case. Like I said, I ran not this one upstairs, but another one I ran to at the bus terminal, and she was literally here for a temporary matter, and that she should already be back in China because she was coming here from mainland China and was getting her education, and then was heading back toward mainland China. So for all of our talk of them being our enemy and everything, we definitely help them with some of their education and all along those lines.
So we have a bunch of expensive stuff happening. We've got an aging population, wants Social Security, wants medical coverage, and medicine is. People don't talk. They talk about how much medicine costs. They don't talk about how medicine used to suck. In the 60s, everybody frickin' died. Now we have cures and fixes for everybody, but it's super expensive, and it's going to get more expensive as medicine gets more powerful and as we get older. And
Hey
so
Rick,
that's
it's not
going to cost.
Rick, it's not expensive if you're a congressman. Because by the way, I was just hearing about that 1,171 page federal budget that Nick was talking about, and apparently the most stunning figure in that is that it costs $275,000 a year to keep a congressman in Washington. So I'm going like, that's a whole lot of money. That's part of the debt right there, because that's more than $250,000 right there that we're using for each congressman to keep them in office. And that's not even counting, because the article that I found this in said that didn't include the outline costs, indirect costs, such as the $1 million spent by executive departments for publications congressmen give because the constituents free of charge, or the cost of military aircraft that are often available for congressional trips here and abroad, and the large amounts of counterpart currency which congressmen spend when they travel overseas. So that didn't even include that. So maybe we're up to like 375 or 300, 400,000. What do you think, David? I'm thinking that they get a whole lot of money and everything. Maybe I need to run for Congress. I think that I might have to do that and everything. That might solve some of my own financial problems.
Well, I think we need term limits. I think we need 12-year term limits. We have something now that the founders never intended. They're called career politicians. Washington warned us of factions. Factions were our political parties. We now have a republic, which is supposed to be a representative democracy that is not representative of nor responsive to the general public. So we don't just need fiscal reforms, we need major political reforms in order to revitalize our democracy and create a better future. But that may be another topic.
Yeah, well, we have another problem.
That is an interesting topic. We've got so many different things that just kind of lurk in the behind the scenes that are going on that we need to fix. One of the other problems is, when I go somewhere, I see a lot of homeless people right now. And then I go to my favorite places of business or restaurants, and they're either closing down or slowing down business for lack of employees. Now, the other problem is if people get employed and they're only getting paid, $10 an hour, that's not enough to sustain, and they get taxed so much and then have to buy insurance and all these other things. They can't even live off of what they are earning. So it's cheaper or more beneficial for them to be unemployed and get, all these other benefits that float around. But the problem with the unemployment situation is you have a homeless person who's standing right next to a door that says we need employees, and they can't get a job there because they need an address. And I think we need to do away with that. I think we can pay them on a virtual payment program. They do this with a lot of waitress now, where their tips are paid on some sort of blockchain, and then they can go use it rather than having to get them and then cash them. So I think that there's so many different ways we can do this so that we can employ these people standing right next to the facility that need them. But right now they can't even hire these people, and these people are begging for food, for money, for a place to stay. And they're and I go, well, why don't you get a job here? They got 5 waiters listed that they needed. So why can't we do something, David? Why can't we even at least fix that?
Yeah, I guess part of the problem is are they legal or illegal? And you're reinforcing the fact that A, we need border security, and B, we need comprehensive immigration reform. But let's get back to the topic.
Most of these people speak English better than me.
That still doesn't mean that they're legal, though. So there's a difference. But in any event, let's get back to the topic. The topic was the budget. Let me give you some big picture numbers. In 2019, fiscal year ended September 30, 2019, which was pre-COVID, total federal spending was $4.45 trillion. $4.45 trillion. In 2023, which was the year just ended, September 30, 2023, total federal spending was $6.2 trillion. So we're going pre-COVID, post-COVID. Obviously, we had significant federal spending associated with COVID. So let's go pre-COVID and post-COVID. That is a 40% increase in federal spending in 4 years, when inflation during that period of time was less than half that. That is unsustainable.
But that includes infrastructure spending, and I know the infrastructure bill was
Well, but most of that hadn't been made, Rick. Most of that hadn't been made yet. But I agree with you. We have a unified budget, which we shouldn't have. We should have a capital budget, which is an investment budget, and an operating budget. We should. That's why we go to debt to GDP. You're talking about the infrastructure bill. You're correct. That was passed, but most of that money hasn't been spent. Most of that money has not been, you remember how they talk about shovel in the ground? You got to make sure that when you put the shovel in the ground, that when you lift it up, it doesn't stink. And it takes quite a while, believe it or not, in the United States to be able to get approvals for things. You may have the money to do something, but you've got to get all kinds of environmental and all kinds of other, approvals before you can even put a shovel in the ground.
Yeah.
But I hear you.
But one part of my objection of the budget, David, is a lot of it's pork barrel budget, and that was the reason of the Internet Infrastructure Act. Who does it really benefit? Google, because they get high-speed lines, get more customers. Yahoo, the same way. So it benefits a select group of wealthy individuals to get high-speed internet connected, rather than them paying for it, which they could do. They also had a law to put these charging stations around the country. Now, wait a minute. Who does that benefit? Tesla. So who comes to Washington, D.C.? Jeff Bezos goes to Washington, D.C. to get favors. Elon Musk goes to Washington, D.C. to get favors. So what we see is the wealthy elite going to your city. And I guarantee you they're there right now, lobbying to get these bills passed so the government will pay for infrastructure they can use, which means we all on the panel pay, but we don't pay. We borrow the money to pay. So we put ourselves more and more in debt. And there's nobody on their side stopping it, because the next thing they do, and I was on a committee that did that we wrote checks to these people. I'm not kidding.
Lobbyists definitely do that. They do that quite a bit.
We would write checks so they would do what we told them to do. And so all of a sudden Congress, in other words, I met once a month to send a bunch of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars to politicians, and they can be bought very cheap, by the way. Okay. And it was disgusting. I quit the NAFA PAC because I'm going, is this all we're doing? Is we're just writing checks to congressmen and senators so they'll do what we're told? That's how Washington works.
Jacoby's had his hand up. Let me make a quick comment, and we'll come back to Rick. Okay. Yes, the infrastructure bill, among other things, had a huge amount of money in there to build charging stations. Now, maybe my memory's not as good as I think, but I don't recall the taxpayers having to pay for gas stations all over the country.
We didn't.
We didn't.
We didn't.
And we shouldn't be paying for this either. But Jacoby, you're up, and then Rick.
Well, just the two things on the EVs, because we're trying to build out the infrastructure for EVs. And yeah, it stinks that Tesla right now has cornered the market on that. But it's similar to in the tech industry where the USB-C was created. And now every phone, even the iPhone, has gone into that USB-C model. So the iPhone 15, you can no longer use any of your old iPhone chargers. It's an evolution, just like how you brought up the gas station. The gas station killed the horse and buggy. So once the gas station came about and car and that infrastructure was built, that killed off horse and buggy. And now it's the same thing with EVs, where EVs, that infrastructure is being built out. So then EVs are slowly taking over. And then when you're looking at the broadband internet wise, that is a huge thing because a lot of these big players from Google, Amazon on down will always benefit. Banker always wins, and complaining about that that can't be the main reason that we're looking at it, because the broadband is also going to help out that small business because we are in a global market. So those individuals that are selling candles in the middle of Wyoming on top of a mountain can now actually sell candles to a individual in Canada who may be interested in those. So that's a big reason also in terms of the education, because education itself is all global, and a lot of the gamification and all the other stuff around education, which propels us into the future, that needs broadband internet and high-speed internet, and a lot of these kids are getting left behind. So when you have those again, going to that kid in Wyoming that's way off in the country that is, just learning about cornfields. Well, now that kid can learn about AI and actually doing coding, which is honestly the future more so than anything that we've talked about today, dealing with the economy itself, because we have AI, which is self-learning and actually creating. So robotics and everything else. When we go to Walmart now, we have self-checkout more than actually checkout lines. Everything we do in the future is dealing with coding, programming, and robotics. And if we have a whole set of kids who are still sitting there in the middle of Wyoming without broadband or understanding what's going on, we're really, really hampering ourselves and keeping ourselves in the past.
I agree. I think Rick is
Ideally-
next. There are huge employment implications of what you just said too, but go ahead.
Ideally, we should decide whether we want to win the future. We went to the moon because JFK said we should go to the moon, and then he got himself assassinated. We felt bad, so we freaking did the space program. Now we're in an undeclared technological almost war with China, with India, and we need an educated populace if we want to win the AI thing. If we make sacrifices to stay technologically ahead of the rest of the world, it will, within a couple decades, solve some of our budgetary problems. But it's just getting there, getting to the future, and getting the U.S. populace convinced that we need to be educated.
But Rick, the United States does not have a strategic plan. So if we don't have a plan, we're not going to go anywhere very fast. Kim?
Hey, David, just really quick, because you made a statement that I need to.
Kim's up. Go ahead.
Okay, I had a few other things I want to bring up, but I want to get back to that point. How did we put their toes to the fire to get this budget done? I mean, and make it. No, I can't say that you can make it simple, but when I do my budget at home and I get myself under control, I make it as simple as possible. I get my spreadsheets together, income, outgo, what I give for charity, what I put in savings, all of these important things that fortunately I learned about later in life. But how do we hold their toes to this in Congress and how do we do that?
Simple messaging, no labels. For instance, is trying to say, look, these are what we're facing, and let's face it without politicizing everything. But the messaging has to be simple, that if you don't fix a lot of these issues, it will cost you and your political party in Washington your jobs and your majorities in the House and the Senate and the presidency.
Three things. No budget, no pay. You don't get it done on time. You don't get paid until you do. You stay in session until you get it done. No retroactive pay. Number two, statutory fiscal sustainability commission. A big aspect of it will be major citizen education and engagement effort throughout the country, in person, online, social media, etc., to educate people about where we are, where we're headed, how we compare to others, what do we need to do. Makes recommendations, up or down vote in Congress, on how we put our finances in order. And thirdly, constitutional amendment that limits how much debt as a percentage of the economy the country can have, absent very limited temporary circumstances with a supermajority vote. All three of those things are essential if we want to create a better future. I think.
But how do we make that happen? That's what I know that this needs to be done. How do we go up there and go, you make this happen?
Well, first, Congress will probably not do no budget, no pay on itself. Okay. Believe it. California has that, and they've always been on time ever since. Now, whether they did that, they may have done it through a referendum. Many states have initiative in referendum. We do not at the federal level. So we only have two ways to get things done. You either get it done through legislation, okay, and they obviously have a conflict on that, just like term limits, or you get it done through a constitutional amendment. There are two ways to get a constitutional amendment done: 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and then go to 3/4 of the states ratify, or 2/3 of the states call for a convention to propose amendments. They come up with a proposal, gets ratified by the states. It's going to be method number 2. And that's
Right.
what I'm working on. That's what
Right.
I'm working on for fiscal responsibility. But once we prove that concept, then you
Yeah.
can use it for other things,
Other things.
like term limits, like campaign finance reform. I think Mark was next, and then Jacoby, and then Rick.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that you said that I was curious about and everything. One is I've seen here in Durham, the term limit conversation has actually gone the opposite direction, because actually here where we are, our local mayor only has 2-year terms. So they're actually trying to increase
too
the term
short.
limit because they feel that's what they feel. They feel it's too short to be involved in politics. So that's the issue, is that there's too short, because by the time they get into office, then it's time for them to start campaigning again. And that's been our issue here in this area. David, you said earlier about the gas taxes, and I was on the about gas and its kind of in connection to government and everything. And I thought that I had remembered there being a fuel tax in the United States and everything that's been here
Right.
since 1932. So I guess we did kind of encourage the gas industry in that sense and everything, even though it's been stuck on the same price, I think, since 1993 or along those lines. But there is a fuel tax that helps with the gas station. So they are kind of encouraged, and we're kind of developed through that tax and everything. That's the only thing I was thinking about as you were saying that.
Yeah, but I don't think that tax was dedicated to building gas stations. I mean, there's a difference between what do we need to do for broad-based societal benefit, and I agree with a lot of things that have been said, including Jacoby's in that regard. All right, we need to look for new infrastructures. There's a difference between that and then determining how are you going to finance it, who's going to ultimately bear the economic burden associated with it. There's
No,
a
I
difference
understand that. And just the last thing I was going to say, and then I'll shut up and everything, is I actually was listening on Facebook, and a friend of mine actually had a very interesting idea. She was actually thinking that with EVs coming around, that we're going to have to start having EV stations. And I know this is going to be expensive, literally provided in the houses as they are constructed, because they are becoming so popular that might be something that we're going to see more of with the new houses being built. That she was actually encouraging people to do that.
Jacoby and then Rick.
With your second thing, talking about the financial education throughout the nation, so on and so forth, that has to be tagged in with the whole broadband, because if you can't, you have to have broadband for everybody if you're going to actually try and educate everyone on that way.
Yep, I hear you.
The only way to get things done, we've got to break up the log jams of super majorities. We've got to break up the safe places, basically the safe zones for elected officials. So they've got to be able to be accountable. So get rid of all the gerrymandering, which is going to be tough, and redraw a lot of
Redistricting reform.
Exactly.
And that doesn't take federal law. That's
I agree.
a state issue.
Yeah, but the problem is we can't get there because you have those super majorities that are fighting against or fighting and putting in those gerrymandering situations. Luckily, the thing happened in Alabama when they tried to throw all the minorities into that one district, but the court struck that down, which was great.
One quick thing before we go to Rick. What the federal government can do under the Constitution, the federal government has the authority to regulate with regard to federal elections, not state and local. All right. And so therefore, what the federal government could do is it could pass a law that says the purpose of redistricting is to maximize the number of competitive districts consistent with the Voting Rights Act, rather than to minimize the number of competitive districts consistent with the Voting Rights Act. That, compared with things like ranked choice voting, integrated and open primaries, campaign finance reform, would create a new world. Rick.
The practical path to anything, all this stuff that should happen, is simple, aggressive messaging. The Republicans have understood this now for decades, and they spend a ton of money and thought on simple messaging, whether it's completely accurate or not. The death tax. Somebody got paid a lot of money to come up with that idea and push it. The idea that Biden equals inflation. Simple, 3 words. We need to hire, need to spend a bunch of money and thought on turning our objectives into advertising type slogans that can be pushed and pushed and pushed.
So the one thing I'll disagree with that part is because we keep dumbing down America. And I think that's the problem. What we keep running into is we're looking for that. We need to get back to understanding what nuanced and education is. Because if we're talking about educating everyone, we can't keep pushing. We need to dumb it down so it'll make it so simple for people to understand.
Well, that's part. Then have a campaign, a push to dumb American up. I mean, the Republicans, the GOP figured out 50 years ago that low information voters are more mobilizable. So they aimed low, and we're suffering for it now because now we have a lot of lunatics.
Two things. I know the guy who came up with the term death tax. His name is Frank Luntz. He's a friend of mine. Okay,
he's a pollster.
He put me out of a job.
But he's also about words. Words matter. Okay,
he's right.
So what I introduced him to was a new word, a new phrase. The new phrase is the birth burden. The fact that we are imposing upon every new child that is born in this country, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt due to past decisions that have been made by others that they have not benefited from. All right. The second thing is there's one thing that I've used from Harvard. When I went to the Kennedy School at Harvard, when the government sent me there, one of the things that I've used, and that is most people can only remember three things. So if you can break a complex issue down to three things in a clear, concise, and compelling fashion, you can have a major impact. So, and the other thing we have to keep in mind is when we're educating, we need to make sure that it's accurate with contextual sophistication. Many politicians will say something that's technically accurate, but it's grossly misleading because they're only talking about one narrow dimension and they're not giving the bigger picture, when in reality, the real story is the opposite of what they're telling you. But what they're telling you is not technically wrong, but it's just grossly misleading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in spite of us being very difficult, we still have thousands of viewers on your show, David.
Oh, okay.
So the thing is, I go, well, at least people are listening to this. And the real problem, like the budget, I hate to say it, that I just couldn't go anywhere to get it. I have to go dig for that, and I think that that's a real problem. It should have been offered in school, somewhere K through 12. They should have sat my little butt down and say, today, rather than going over American history, which is interesting but doesn't do me a bit of good, we're going to discuss the U.S. budget. It's dry and boring, but we're going to go through it page by page so you'll know where your $5 trillion went. And K through 12 is great because you don't have a choice. You have to listen to it.
We need to get the 10-page version first.
Yeah, start with the 10. A whole semester class could be
with charts and graphs.
75 pages.
I would have gladly given up the units on the Pilgrims to trade that for a unit on the budget.
Exactly. In other words, who gives a rat's rear about the Pilgrims coming over? Let's talk about the U.S. budget. Forget American history. The U.S. budget affects you today. It'll affect you tomorrow. It'll affect your children, your grandchildren. We're going to discuss that. Who gives a rat's rear about the Pilgrims? And with that, we want to thank our panelists for economics, and we will see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Take care. Have a good week. Bye-bye.